Luxembourg Gardens, and I go, and there's a couple sitting there, and they have their feet up. You guys can't see me over there, but they have their feet up on their chairs. And so the man is sitting like this reading the paper, and his companion sitting there reading the paper, and they have a chair in between them. And so I was going to ask, can anybody guess what was on the chair in between them? It wasn't a dog. Lunch? No, it wasn't lunch. They brought their cat, and the cat was in a cat crate with the door open. And so there they were on a Sunday morning, reading the paper, having coffee, visiting with their cat. And I thought that was the ultimate in a public realm that was designed to be responsive to the needs of the residents. You know, that this is a place, and the reason I love that park so much is you go there, and at any given time, it can be your living room. It's whatever you want to make of it. If you want to move chairs into the shade, because it's a hot day, or you want to move chairs into the sun because it's a cool day. If you want to bring your cat, if you want to bring a book, whatever you want to do. But that to me is kind of my poster child for the great public realm. It's got to feel like it's your place and be flexible enough to do what you want to do. So Pete, you want me to leave these chairs up here while I talk? Okay, before I knock them down. So I'm Dave Barth, and where Gary talked about sort of the broad view of the public realm. Mine is more of a practical how-to, and we're getting more drilling down to more of the details before Stroud talks about a case study. So one of the really cool things about talking about the public realm in 2012 as opposed to 20 years ago is nobody's arguing anymore about the value of the public realm in creating sustainable, livable cities. You know, you heard the mayor talk about how important the public realm is. If you pick up any of the best places to live magazines, whether it's Kiplingers or Money, or pick any one you want, all you have to do is go through the top 5 list, top 10 list, and you will see the same words over and over and over again. These are the kinds of places that people want to go to live. They want access to these kinds of spaces. If you read any of the research over the last 10 or 20 years, you have people like John Crompton at Texas A&M who talks about the importance of the public realm and the benefits it generates to the community. Economic sustainability, social sustainability, environmental sustainability. It's all been documented. There's tons of data. We don't have to argue about that anymore. The private sector believes in the public realm now as well. So when we did the needs assessment for Parks and Recreation for downtown San Diego, that was led by the development community. And so the president of the Center City Development Corporation has this quote, which is very much like what the mayor said. You know, that you need a great public realm to be a great city. And so you have a community here, and I thought this was interesting about San Diego. They were anticipating 60,000 new residents, 100,000 new workers, and 40,000 new dogs. And so the whole question with the public realm is not only how do you create a public realm that attracts people to come want to live in your community, but how do you accommodate their needs? How do you figure out what their needs are? And that was a big issue. And I love the poster on the left. That was posted to the gate of this little neighborhood green space. And to me, it was the epitome of what was going on in San Diego. There's just too many people who want to use the same plot of green space. And so a big part of planning for the public realm is understanding how to meet the needs of all users and to try to eliminate as much as possible the conflicts that you have. The private sector in Atlanta, this is the Buckhead area. Does anybody know Buckhead in Atlanta? So you have this really high-end redevelopment area that was never designed to be a city. It was first residential, it was kind of rural residential, and then it was suburbia with a mall, and it has become this city in itself, designed without adequate park space. So once again, the private development community has hired us to come in and say, how do we retrofit this community that's underparked? And they don't mean parking cars, they mean that they have the lowest acres per thousand acres per thousand in Atlanta. They're down to 2.14 acres per thousand in Buckhead, as opposed to, say, you look on the chart on the right, 10 acres in other parts. Some of the best places to live in the United States are 20 and 30 acres per thousand population. So you've got Buckhead that has 2.14 acres per thousand, and they're saying in order for us to compete, not just in the Atlanta area, but nationally, in order for us to be successful economically, we've got to bring in green space. And so we have a steering committee that was made up of elected officials, made up of property owners, developers, the Audubon Society, different groups came together to work on developing a public realm plan to retrofit Buckhead to make it more desirable in order to be competitive. You've got places like Chicago that have clearly invested in the public realm over the last 20 years with great economic returns. So you just look at the numbers there, and Gary was talking about just the lease rates of everything surrounding Millennium Park has really helped pay for itself. So that was a private initiative. You've got the investments you made here. So again, we don't have to do the heavy lifting. We don't have to convince people that investment in the public realm is critical to the livability and sustainability of the city. What people really want to talk about when we do these public realm plans around the country is how do we figure out what the needs are of our community? How do we figure out the needs of not only the residents we have, but the folks who don't live here yet? How do we anticipate? How do we use a crystal ball when we're talking about people who don't live here yet? How do we meet those needs, especially in a built-out urban environment? And what are some of the elements that we need to think about? What makes a great public realm when we get around to designing? So those are some of the points I'm going to talk about. And Pete's going to tell me when I'm running out of time. So are you watching the clock? So, okay. So you start with, and this is kind of the world according to me, so I've cobbled together different ideas from different authors and people I admire and in our practice. But I think there's some real basics. I think if you're saying, I first want to make sure that the center city or city center area of Tampa has a great basic public realm, I think there's some basic things that must be included. And what we find is that most of us, no matter where we live, have certain things we want to do in our neighborhood and certain things that we're willing to drive out of our neighborhood to do. And you have to look at that list and see if that resonates with you. Most of us want to be able to safely take a walk in the evening or walk our dogs. We want our kids to be able to ride, or we want to ride around the neighborhood safely. We don't want to worry about getting run over. We want to go outside. We want to pick up game. We may want to go to some type of local event or farmer's market or something in our neighborhood. We may want to go to a community garden without getting our car. So that's kind of that basic element first of how do I make sure every neighborhood in downtown Tampa can do those kinds of things. And then most of us are saying we're willing to drive a bit, either take transit or ride a bike or get in the car to go to those things that we don't really expect in our neighborhood. In a lot of cases, we don't want them in our neighborhood. But those are the things that we're willing to drive to. And it's different in every community, but these are some basic fundamentals that seem to hold true in every community in which we work. What's different, are all of you familiar with the transect? I assume we've got a bunch of planners and designers in here, but the transect says that there's different physical form as you go from rural, which is over here, to urban over here. And so if you think about those previous slides, let's take the idea of letting your dog out because your dog's got to go to the bathroom. There's going to be a theme here about dogs. But that's not just a fad. That seems to be with us, and I think it's really important to talk about for downtown Tampa and livability. But let's say your dog needs to go out. If you're on the left side of that chart, you open the door and you kind of tell the dog to go out and tell him to come back when he's done. I mean, that's the response to the need for a place for your dog if you're living in a rural area, if you're living out in the county. But if you're in a high rise, if you're 50 stories up, you got a very, very different kind of response. And so, you know, you may have a dog park because now, and ideally it's within a walkable distance. You may have, you know, streets or sidewalks or trails in an urban area. These are all different ways that people are accommodating dogs. Or you may just be out of luck. And, you know, but, you know, the idea here is that the response, the appropriate response to a need varies depending on if you're living in a single family home or you're in a mid-rise, you're in a high-rise. The need stays the same, but the response, and so what will happen as you look at downtown Tampa, each neighborhood may have a different response to how you meet those needs than other neighborhoods. And so that's part of the process of designing a public realm, is really understanding the differences between those neighborhoods, but still meeting those basic needs. You can take those basic needs and you can translate those into some pretty simple ideas, pretty simple spaces. It does not need to be rocket science when you're planning how to retrofit your public realm. And so you can see that the streets are a real workhorse. that we're asking the streets to do a lot of stuff that traditionally the streets used to do. I have a great urban design book, and I loved it. It says the streets used to be where you come to meet and socialize, the streets were where the markets were, and the streets were where the lynchings were held. And so, any public executions were also in the street as well. So, but the streets have historically been the workhorses in our communities, and over time, as you all know, they become single purpose, and we need to bring those back again. So that's kind of the baseline of a good public realm. And we talk about transformational ideas, and I'll talk about this more in a minute, but one transformational idea may be that every resident within the study area can safely and comfortably ride a bike or walk to the waterfront. So there's one simple idea. How would you make it so every resident, no matter where you live, could get down to the waterfront comfortably? So this is just kind of the list of the typical kinds of spaces we need to consider for successful public realm. So we talk about the street. Here's a single purpose street, but here's what's called a complete street. So the difference you can see is that caters to just automobiles, but that's catering to shoppers and businesses and automobiles and bicyclists and pedestrians and kids and stormwater and birds, and just the list goes on and on. So again, the streets are a key workhorse of our public realm, and that would be one of the first layers that we have to take a good look at. I told you dogs was going to be a theme. It's critical to understand how we take care of the needs of pets and their owners, because more and more folks, especially folks who want to live in an urban area, these are their children. It's also a really big social activity, making play dates to meet with your buddies at the dog park. There's singles that meet. There's all kinds of things that deal with an urban lifestyle that have to do with pets and making sure your pets are taken care of. And there's different options. There's dog runs, there's urban dog parks. If space is really tight, there's rooftop dog parks, there's interior dog parks. But so again, there's different kinds of responses, but part of the public realm needs to respond to the need for pets and their owners. You have the local park. How many of you have a park in your neighborhood that is yours, that you can walk to, that you can have a kids party at, playground? Oh, cool. So for those of you who aren't looking backwards, about 50%. So that's a really fundamental part of the public realm. That place that's mine, it doesn't have to be huge. There's got to be enough to do. One of the keys is, and we'll talk about that more in a minute, it can't be just a dead space. There's got to be enough going on, but it's got to be the kind of place that I can walk to, I don't need to drive to, and there's a playground, I can have a birthday party, there's a pavilion, I can take my dog, I can throw a ball, I can kick a soccer ball, I can practice, all those kinds of things that we talked about. And so there's another transformational idea. There's two posters up there. City of Denver said, we want every resident to have access to a green space within 6 blocks of their home. And now they've shortened it to 4 blocks. St. Pete, that Pete Seckler worked on, the mayor said, I want every kid in St. Pete to be able to get to a playground within a half-mile walk. So there's 2 simple transformational ideas. Everybody in the downtown area should be able to walk or ride their bike safely to the waterfront, and everybody should have access to a basic playground and neighborhood park. 2 very simple ideas, but you would need to go neighborhood by neighborhood and see the different ways that you could accommodate that. And some of the neighborhoods already do that. You have small civic spaces. Those are those interstitial spaces. In San Diego, when we survey the business community and survey tourists, the only kinds of spaces the business community was looking for were lunchtime spaces, places to take a walk, places to sit and have lunch. So there's some basic fundamental things that are important. 3 left? Wow, I'll have to go faster. Okay, and we have the larger multi-purpose spaces, and again, you have examples of that as well. So there's basic elements of the public realm that you meet. This is that space I was talking about, a multi-purpose green space where we had the poster. So here's an example in a neighborhood of a small green space that's used for kids, it's used for dog owners as well, and those are really important. And then when you get outside the neighborhoods, cities around the country are doing all kinds of things to meet those needs, and those vary by city. And I don't know what the top priority needs are here in Tampa. But there's a great book out by Peter Harnick that talks about using all these underutilized spaces around the city in order to provide green space. And so a couple of examples. Here's a ball field under the right-of-way of the Hudson River Parkway in New York. So using the right-of-way here, this is the idea of taking an underutilized parking lot because there's a parking deck adjacent to it where the shot was taken, and converting that into green space, a skateboard park, a green, et cetera. So there's all kinds of opportunities. Here's a rooftop deck being converted into a park. And there's great examples around the country. There's the, Gary, do you know what the name of the barge is in New York? There's the pool barge. So there's actually a swimming pool on the, is that the East River in New York? So there's a swimming pool, and that pool is brought in seasonally and taken away. On the top right is an outdoor fitness center on a rooftop in San Diego. On the bottom left is a mountain bike park under the freeway in Seattle. And then Pete already talked about the High Line on the right, which has really become a neighborhood park as well as a regional draw. So there's all kinds of ways for communities to both meet the needs of residents within each neighborhood, but also be really innovative for meeting other needs in the community. So I'll take you through this real quick. One of the questions then is, well, beyond basics, how do we know what residents need? And there's a variety of techniques and ways to do this. But here's a real laundry list. This was an exercise we did in Chicago where we asked folks, what are all the elements in their public realm? And you can see, it includes just all kinds of stuff. So how do you know what the priorities are? There's a concept that says triangulation, that says the way you figure out priorities is you use multiple techniques, some of which we're doing through this process. So you do public workshops, you do surveys, you do a wide variety of techniques. And so when you're ready, when you go beyond this framework plan, for example, and you're ready to drill down in more detail, you would go back into the neighborhoods. You would build on the work that you did with the audits, and you start talking about what are the needs within each of the neighborhood. You might do surveys. What this survey shows is the things in the top right quadrant are both the needs that are unmet and the things that are most important to people. So no surprise, the very top right says small neighborhood parks within walking distance. It says on-street bicycle lanes. So we're hearing the same things through communities throughout the country. You can do level of service analysis, and we can spend hours talking about level of service, but there's all kinds of ways to do techniques, or all kinds of techniques to do level of service. One of which is measuring access. How far do I have to go to get to a different kind of facility? So for example, in San Diego, we were looking at how far you had to go to get to an athletic field. So the areas in brown are the areas that are the folks who have access to a ball field. If we say a half-mile access is important, if we say a mile is okay, then the service area gets bigger. So there's all kinds of techniques you can analyze. Here's the, you can see, this is the downtown San Diego area. This is comparable to our study area. None of these folks have walking access to an off-leash dog park. Only the folks in brown do. And so then you start saying, well, do we provide better access, or do we provide additional facilities? But this type of evaluation helps you figure out where the voids are in your community. Same idea with water access. How do you increase the number of people who can walk to the waterfront? So this graphic simply shows by removing some barriers, making some connections, we can help improve the access to the waterfront in San Diego. This is a quick graphic that Blake did that started showing, if you looked at the downtown study area for Tampa, and you took the existing parks, the areas in brown are the areas where people don't have walking access to a neighborhood park as the crow flies. So that's just a very simple exercise that uses circles as opposed to actually measuring distances. You can always do kids workshops. That's another technique. Highly unscientific, but fun. And so you start getting things like ice cream parlors, and you get zoos and surf shops, pool halls. 6 kids wanted a pool hall. So, it's an interesting technique to do, but it's the combination of all these different techniques that lets you figure out what the top priorities are in the community. And I know you can't read that chart, but what you have is all the different needs assessment techniques are listed along the top. So it says things like data review, site analysis, public workshops, stakeholder interviews, surveys, and then all the different elements of the public realm are listed along the left. And so what you see over on the right are these are the things that bubbled up as being the top priorities. So that's one way, once we have the framework, when you're trying to figure out where to make your first investments, this is a whole process that you can use to try to figure out what the top priority needs are. Ultimately, that translates then into a development program for the entire downtown area, and it translates into a development program for individual neighborhood parks. So that's how the needs assessment process works. So Pete, I got this last section. You want to hold off on that? No, go ahead. Okay. I'll do this quick. So in our work and in our readings, we've identified, say, 12 great principles. Let's say you've gone through the needs assessment, you've got the framework for the public realm, you understand what the top priorities are, but there seem to be some basic truths now about how we need to design the public realm. And there's an author I really like named Galen Kranz, who wrote Parks and the Politics of Design or something like that back in the 80s. But she came out with an article in the 90s, and she said she had tracked the different eras of park design in the United States. And she says, you know what, we're in this fifth era, we're in this sustainability era. And the part I love the most is that last bullet, because she said that what's important in this new era that we're in is that the public realm needs to play a role larger than just the boundaries of the facility. It's no longer just about what's inside, it's also about the impacts it has on the larger community. And so there's 12 principles, and I'm going to hit on them really fast, and you can stop me if you have a question. But most of these is going to be like preaching to the choir. Everything we do has got to be green and energy efficient. We can't afford to waste energy. Everything we do in the public realm needs to look at how it can generate economic benefits, whether it's improving adjacent property values, creating jobs, creating concessions, some way or another has got to generate economic benefits. Everything we do has got to be activated. So you look at how many events happen at Curtis Hickson, how many a week? Anybody know? How many programmed events?
5 or more.
Pete says 5 or more. Do I hear 10, 15, 20? Mayor, how many things are happening at Curtis Hickson every week, do you know? So there's this group called the Project for Public Spaces in New York that came up with a phrase, the power of 10, that says every great public space has to have at least 10 things to do. And so the idea is that whether it's food, or whether it's this little sailboat rental where you push a sailboat with a stick, or just coming up with things like flying a kite, or swinging, or reading, or getting on Wi-Fi, every one of our public spaces has got to be thought of as being activated, programmed, stuff to do. We're in a different age than we were 20 or 30 years ago. Everything has got to be connected. Pete showed you our connectivity diagram. And what you can't read on the lower right, those stripes, and I can barely read it, says streets, bike lanes, greenways, trails, transit, blueways, and utility corridors. Everything's got to be connected. So for example, in Miami-Dade, here's an example of a non-connected community, and then using canals, streets, sidewalks, bikeways, here's connected. So connection. Every green space has got to promote healthy lifestyles. It could be community gardens, it could be cooking classes, it could be fitness programs. Could every park in downtown area have Tai Chi going on at 6 a.m. in the mornings? You know, can some volunteer lead that? Can every park be about physical fitness and eating well and dealing with health? Can we advertise fitness and boot camps? So there's all kinds of ways, low-cost ways, by the way, to promote physical wellness. Every space has got to be flexible. We can't afford anymore to have single-purpose facilities. So here's Bryant Park. Sometimes it's a festival site. Sometimes it's a place to sit and eat lunch. You know, can every space in Tampa's public realm be flexible and designed to do as much as possible? How do we constantly reach out to the community? How do you not stop that with this planning process? But every decision with the public realm continues to reach out. This is my favorite garbage truck technique, but there's some other techniques as well. There's surveys, and there's all the techniques that you're using for this process. So how do we continue to reach out to the community? How do we integrate everything with the community's infrastructure so that stormwater isn't just stormwater, it's also trails, it's also parks. Then Pete, I have like 2 more. How do we protect all of our resources? And how do we maximize all the resources that we have? We talked about utilizing the underutilized spaces. And last, and this is probably the most important, how do we transcend these historic silos that have been built up over time? And they've been built up not purposefully, but if you look at every element of the public realm, it resides somewhere else. We have certain folks take care of stormwater, certain folks take care of parks, certain folks take care of streets, certain folks take care of libraries. So how do we over time transcend those silos so that we look at it as one unified system that maximizes the benefit for livability and sustainability for the city? So thank you very much.